The live stream is rolling. Cool. Hi everyone, thanks for joining. Watch someone else in. There we go. Just to mention that this session is being recorded and live streamed. So if you don't want your camera on, or if you want to change your name, feel free to do that. If you have any questions throughout the session, or you can either pop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll try to answer those. You can also keep them to the end if you prefer. We'll just wait for a couple more people to join, see if anyone else is joining, and then we'll start it. Doesn't seem like anyone is joining. So, oh no, that's someone else. Here we go. Go. Let them join in, and then we can start. Okay. Thank you so much all for attending our third session of the day. Thank you. I want to pronounce your name correct. So is it Susha? How do you pronounce it?
Suchandrika.
I was going in the right direction then. Thank you so much for coming. I think let's start maybe with your introduction about what you do, your experience, who you are. Is that all right? Yeah.
Yeah, so hi everyone, thanks for coming along. It's always good to see a sea of blank boxes with names in them. So I'm Suchandrika Chakrabarti. I'm a freelance journalist. I took up stand-up comedy in January 2000, which has been fun. I make a podcast, do a bit of voiceover. Oh my God, just like anything to make a career happen, do a bit of copywriting and content stuff. I think that's about it. If we were allowed out, I'd probably get a job in Starbucks if I needed to. But I'm a firm believer of jobs outside of journalism only adding to your journalism, because the more kind of people outside of journalism you meet, the more stories you hear, the more that you keep in touch with zeitgeist. And before I went freelance in April 2018, I worked at the Daily Mirror for 3 years and across Reach PLC. So I was training journalists as well as doing the job when needed, particularly on nights like the Brexit vote and the Trump vote. And before that, I worked at places like the Associated Press, The Guardian, and Media Trust. So pretty much, yeah, all journalism with a few years in charity. Oh, and I train as well. I need to get that one in. So part of, I think, what you found me is I've got a masterclass on personal essays came up at the end of February, and I think I tweeted it out, which is probably how you saw me. So I train things like personal essays, like writing type stuff, but also, oh God, what else do I train? Like podcasting. I train charities how to get into the press. So digital storytelling type stuff, and helping people outside of the media to work with the media when there are good calls, generally. I think that's about it.
Yeah, I found you through that article you were saying about writing personal essays, and I thought it was really interesting. So I wanted to have you speak to everyone. You also have a newsletter, is that?
Oh God, yes, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, and actually those are full of personal essays. That's another way you can start trying out your personal essays. So it's suchandrika.substack.com. I'll put it in the chat. And yeah, if you're thinking about trying out a newsletter, I think Substack is a really nice platform to play around with. Yes, I need to make a note of all these things I do somewhere.
Yeah, you do quite a lot. It's really impressive. So, like you said, you've got quite an extensive portfolio of personal essays. So, what has led you down that route?
Well, I think for me that I always wanted to go freelance as a journalist, and in many ways, my journalism career was a bit of a cover story for wanting to just write and wanting to write novels. Like I did an English degree. I always read novels when I was younger, pre-internet. So I think the internet has changed our attention spans, and it's a bit different now to read at that length. But yeah, the idea was always to try writing fiction, try writing books. And so for me, I really find that it's been that stepping stone between really journalistic kind of writing and also in terms of who I appear to be online, because that's something to think about as well, that for people who followed me since like 2012, I've really pivoted in terms of what I'm doing as a job. And so I think personal essays sit in this area where there's still journalism in a way, because they're kind of lived experience of reporting from your own life. But at the same time, you can write in a very different way to what you'd find in a newspaper. And you'll find that I've not really written personal essays for newspapers. I don't think they generally really take them. Like you can have a first person account of something, or you can present yourself as a case study in 800 words. But generally, you can't try having a metaphor threaded throughout your 800 words. The newspaper will go, why are you writing like that? Straight to the point. If you want to write in a more kind of literary way or play around with language, then I think your general personal essay that you're sort of not thinking about the news, but you're kind of thinking, I've had this experience and it's evergreen, then personal essays are the kind of stepping stone between just the facts, factual journalism, towards maybe fiction and other kind of formats. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. And obviously, I've been looking through the stuff that you write as well. And you say that writing about personal experiences can open quite a lot of doors for like a journalist's career. What do you mean by this, and how has that happened for you specifically?
Yeah, so what I found that's really interesting is often my first byline on a particular website. So, for instance, theoutline.com, I'm trying to find a few others, Marie Claire, Curbed, which is Vox Media, so that's kind of cities, and the equivalent website over at Bloomberg, City Lab. My first byline at all of those websites was a personal essay. So there's a couple of ways you can approach a personal essay, but what I've tended to do is, if I see an editor calling out for a particular kind of pitch, so you'll go on Twitter or you get one of those emails from freelancers who collate sort of pitch call outs from editors. And they'll say, we've got this new series. So with Bloomberg, it was maps that mean something to me. And I just knew immediately, I was like, oh, this is 70s tube map, London Underground map that my mum had. That I definitely want to write a story around that. So sometimes you'll get this call out and it'll be a question of molding something in your life to the specifics of the story that they want. And I find that American websites are generally quite keen. Sometimes they'll get a round of funding and they'll say, right, we're going to do this essay series. Another one is artsy.net. So they generally cover like art fairs, new exhibitions, that kind of thing. Obviously at the moment, a lot of that's gone virtual. But they've got a series called This Artwork Changed My Life. And so again, I thought, oh, I've got something for that. And it's probably because I'm older than you guys. So I've had many more years perhaps to have done this stuff. But straight after uni, I went to Florence and I studied art history and apparently the Italian language for 6 months. But the Italian lessons were in the morning when I was hungover. And so none of us in my flat went. But in the afternoon, I did go to Italian art history lessons. And so I knew that there was this moment when I saw this amazing piece of art in Florence in the Brancacci Chapel in this church that had sort of hit me like thunder. It had been like a moment of, oh my God. So I knew I could draw on that and write an essay around that. So I think it's partly looking back on your experiences and thinking, how can I shape them to what the editor is asking for? But I think you can also have your own subjects, your own ideas, and have essays in the back of your mind that you would like to write and think about pitching those out in the future as well. I've forgot the rest of your question. I'm not sure if I'm answering it. I think you're muted.
I am muted, yes, I just realized. I was just saying, like, because you mentioned that writing about personal experiences can open a lot of doors. And my question is, how can that happen? And how does that happen to you specifically?
I think that the value of lived experience has gone up in the internet age. I think we don't just have like a walled castle of there are this many journalists in the world and only they are allowed to write about things. I think we value people who've gone through XYZ experience to write about these experiences. And I think if we want to hear about what it's like to live in a certain country, we would rather go to someone who's in that country now, as opposed to have someone from the West maybe go to another country and write about it, a kind of colonial mindset. So I think we're looking with the internet at allowing people to have their own voices and to tell their own stories. And it might be for some people who don't want to pursue writing as a career, so not you guys, but someone might come along and just write that one essay, but it's about an experience that's so extraordinary or so interesting. So the Guardian have a really, like Saturday Guardian, have like this like experience column, and it'll be things like I was swallowed by a whale, like just like really brilliant stuff, like very unusual stuff. There's lots of parodies of it as well, but the people writing those essays, that might be their one essay that they write, and they don't necessarily want to pursue a career as a writer or a journalist. So there's kind of that end of things where it's like something spectacular or remarkable happened to me. And then there's the other end of like someone who wants to pursue a career. So I do write about a lot of the same experiences. I write about grief. I lost my parents quite young. I write, like grief is quite a big one. I write about cities quite a lot and about cities changing. So I grew up on the edge of London and then moved further in. So the place where I'm from, out in Zone 6, a place called Hornchurch, is the kind of place I thought would never change. It's so boring and suburban, but actually it is changing because all of London is changing. And in general, the world's population is moving into cities much more. Until the pandemic, in fact, when people are now leaving London. So I always find it quite interesting how we assume the places that we're born in stay the same, but nowhere in the 21st century is going to just stay the same for 3 decades. So what I find is that editors they don't always, but they can value lived experience, and so that has got me into publications that I had not written for before. And after I've had that initial good experience working with an editor, I've gone back and written more for them. So I'd say often it can be your way into a website or a publication that you've not found another way to get into.
Yeah. My next question you've already sort of answered it, but you could probably go a little bit more into it. How do you know what to write specifically and where to pitch it to or who to pitch it to?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know how many of you guys have tried freelancing. I know people are sort of trying it earlier and earlier on, like when they're at uni, when they're studying journalism. I think that's amazing because I didn't read, I did my English degree in NCTJ, and then I did a lot of work experience, and I was lucky that some of my work experience led to writing for a website. But I didn't specifically sit down and think, right, I'm just gonna start writing on the side of my studies. But I do notice that more and more younger people are doing that, and I think there are many reasons, like your courses cost a lot. There's a sense of competition, and that you need to get started. So something I would suggest when you're starting freelancing is knowing where to find editors and where they are talking about what they want. And that's generally Twitter, which thankfully you guys are probably on too. The point is to not be on Twitter all day long every day because it will drive you insane. So it's about following people, and a good example is like Wired. The staff of Wired are really good at being on Twitter and saying, right, my inbox is empty, I'm looking for pitches. And I can't tell you when exactly they'll do that. Maybe at the first of the month they have a meeting and go, right, we need to get on Twitter and ask for pitches. But a way to get around just sitting on Twitter and looking for these editors is there's some emails out there that you can subscribe to, email newsletters. So one of them is by Sonia Weiser. I can put her name in the chat if you look her up on Twitter. She's got she's in New York, but she looks for stuff that's in Britain. Also, you can write for American websites. There's nothing to stop you. So Sonia Weiser, you look her up on Twitter, and she's got an email called Opportunities of the Week. And she sends out every week, and basically she will collate all of these editors' tweets saying, right, I'm the editor for Apartment Therapy, and I want you to write about where you live as though you're in love with it, which is a pitch called out that I answered. So I live really near Abbey Road, where the Beatles recorded. So I wrote a love letter to this part of town, like Swiss Cottage, Kilburn kind of area. as though it's a rock star and I have a crush on it. And it was really fun working with the editor on that. She had a very strong view of like what the format was and what she wanted the tone to be. And so that was a really like fun, silly personal essay. But it was literally, she's called Madeline Billis. She's on Twitter. You can do certain things like search, if you want to find like the Huffington Post's opinion editor, you can search at HuffPost UK, just the word opinion, and then find them. So the ways of finding them, but I would suggest Sonia's email. Another one is the Freelance Beat. So she is on Twitter. If you find her, you can get hold of her newsletter. Often people retweet these opportunities as well. I'm trying to think of the third one. Is there another one? PitchWiz is a good one. So PitchWiz is a website, pitchwiz.com. And again, I think he mainly finds these opportunities on Twitter. So editors kind of find Twitter a town square to go and cry out like, I need content. Can you give me this content? And then they should either have their email in their bio or in that tweet. People are getting better at sharing rates, but I will say that rates are generally low. It is generally quite hard to live in a city like London and make all of your money from this, but it can definitely be part of your career. As long as you don't necessarily financially rely on the personal essays, it can be like something that you do a couple of times a month, depending on what else you're doing. But Twitter is basically my answer to where do you find them. And editors can be surprisingly detailed about what they want, because they understand that anyone in the world who's fluent in English and has Wi-Fi and can log into Twitter can find their tweet. So they often get lots of replies that aren't suitable. So they are willing to be very kind of like, this is exactly what I want, like, let's have a chat. So yeah, Twitter, as is the answer to many things.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I'm always on Twitter as well, and I see so many people, posting all the time. So I think it's just like you said, following the right people.
And also, can I just add that? So often I had this feeling when I first started freelancing, I was really chained to the laptop, and that actually goes against what freelancing is. You're meant to work at your own pace and your own time, and also you have to go and walk outside and move, because freelancing, you can just sit on your sofa all day and it's very unhealthy. But what I found with these call outs, if I'm a bit late to them, and it's hard to know what late means. You don't know if the editor's just got 50 replies or 500, or you have no idea. But if I feel like, oh, it's been a couple of days, or I'm not into that pitch call out, I'll just make sure I get their details and I put them in draft emails in my Gmail. And I just put like Mary Claire, features editor. And then I'll copy and paste the tweet in, just so I know she asked for this in the past. I know this is her contact details. Maybe I'll email in the future, because you can still cold pitch people anytime you want. I just find that if somebody's asking for a certain piece of content and you can offer it, you're going to have a higher success rate. But having their details is useful. You could try pitching them in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't think about putting him in drafts, but that's also a good idea. What I do is, if you go to your Google contacts, you can make like a tab called media contacts. And then within that, you can put all the editors' emails and labels saying where they're from, what kind of things they're looking for, all those kind of things. But I think, like you said, drafting is also a good idea. So do you have any tips on how to write a successful personal essay? And is there anything that's important to keep in mind while doing that?
Yeah, so what I'd say is, there are kind of two tones with personal essay generally. There's more of a fun, light tone. So I mentioned that ridiculous shuttle train where I'm from, writing about the area I live in as though I'm in love with it. So generally, like, I wouldn't go as far as to say they're all out comedy, but they're kind of light, silly, fun tone. You'll get this in popular culture quite a lot as well, like a personal essay on why you love Bridgerton, for instance, or like why you love period drama. And so they will say something about you, but also it's more about the piece of popular culture, and that's why the readers are coming in to read it. So there's that side of things, and I think that's a choice if you want to write those kind of fun, light ones. But when we think about personal essays, we think about trauma, and we think about wounds, and we think about emotional pain, and we think about healing. And so what do you do if you want to write those kinds of essays? I've written a lot of those kinds of essays. And I think the first thing is, like, it took me like 15 years from when things happened to when I wrote anything about them. So give yourself time. Often I found that people, their first instinct is to write something. Like, I've had people come to me who know me personally and kind of always do a brain dump and say, hey, like, do you think I could publish this? And I think sometimes when difficult things happen in our lives, that first urge to write is probably a sign that we want our therapist. And that is not a bad thing. And going to a therapist at different times in our lives is a really healthy and good thing to do. And it's a sign of strength. So therapy is always there to go to and to go back to, and you can end it whenever you feel the need to, but it's always there as a support. And what therapy is essentially is the telling of stories. And it's a really good way to find out what your narrative is and to make sense out of the chaos. So there's a really great Margaret Atwood quote that I love from Alias Grace. And it's about how we're in the middle of something traumatic or difficult. It's like being in the middle of in a boat in the middle of a storm, and there's like wood everywhere and splinters and glass and waves, and you can't think or see anything, and you can't see the story, and you can't see yourself. You have no perspective. But it's only afterwards you can look back and say, right, this was the chaos, and what's the thread in it that I can make a story out of? So it does take time, and it can take some self-analysis, and it can maybe take support in terms of therapy. And none of that is anything to ever be ashamed of or to worry about, and you can keep it completely private if you want. But then you might find yourself doing that second kind of writing about it, and that second kind of writing is really different because it's not just for you. And so the first kind of writing is usually very much about like sticking to the facts and making sure it's exactly as it happened, because to have someone tell you that your idea of reality is something else would be very harmful to you. So you need to know this is how it happened, and this is for me to understand and remember. But then the second kind of writing is probably when you're getting used to the thought that you might want an audience, and you have to write differently for an audience. If you want to write about something really deep and really personal and you want people to read it, you have to give them a reason to read it. And usually the fact that something happened to you is not a good enough reason. So how do you bridge that divide? So I'm bringing up this tiny poem. I think I can't remember the name of the poem, but it just goes, why bother? Because there is someone out there with a wound in the shape of your words. So really the people you're writing for, it can be anyone, but it's often people who are a bit behind you on your journey. So they might have had something similar happen to them or to someone they love or someone they know. And they want to know if healing or getting your life back together, or like put in whichever term you want for like being okay, is possible. So really when you're writing for an audience, you can only really start writing that when healing has begun, when life has begun to come back together, when you stepped off the ship in the middle of becoming a shipwreck and you're safe on land, and possibly there's still a ship there or it's completely fallen apart, but you're okay. You can only really write from that place in your life, and people can only really bear to read it as well when you've processed it and found a way to show that you're okay in the writing. So I actually really I really go on a lot about boundaries and making sure you're okay when I teach people about personal essays, rather than just diving in, because I think that's actually much more important. Better to not put a personal essay out there than to put one out there and regret it, because you get feedback from people. I wrote about my mum had schizophrenia. She had a serious chronic mental illness which she never recovered from. She also never had the insight to know she had that illness. And I wrote about it. It was important to me to write about it, and it actually felt really good to do that. And I got so much feedback from people who had similar issues in their lives. And I didn't put it on Facebook for lots of reasons. Your entire family and friends are on there. And I thought there's certain people in my life who probably don't need it pushed in their faces. That's okay. But then the publication put it on their Facebook page, which is absolutely fine. And a stranger wrote a very emotional comment under it. And I think when you see things like that, it's very hard to just leave them hanging and be like, oh, I won't do anything. So I responded to her. And in doing that, it pushed the piece into everyone's newsfeed. And that was actually fine. Like, I was in the place where I was ready to write the story and I wasn't ashamed of it, and I didn't want to hide it in the dark. But then, oh my God, my phone was like melting. There were people from school like, oh my God, just I didn't know this. There was so much feedback that you were going to have to deal with that. Do you want to do that? And if you think about something like the podcast Griefcast by the comedian actress Carrie Lloyd, so that comes out of, she lost her dad when she was 15. So she has some experience of grief and of wanting to talk about grief. But again, she's almost become the de facto like person to go to about grief on the internet. And she tries to respond to all her Twitter DMs and her Instagram private messages and everything like that. And you can become the person who's the beacon for that issue on the internet. And it comes with a sense of responsibility, but at the same time, it isn't a job you have to fulfill. So again, like, can you actually bear the thought of someone reading it. And I think those are two very different impulses, wanting to be read and then actually the reality of being read. And it's okay to be here just to want, but not sure if you're ready. Because again, that might just mean writing stuff and putting it in a drawer or putting it in a secret folder in your Gmail or anything else that you want to do, but just leaving that step before putting it out in the world. The longer that takes, fine, but actually the most important thing that you can do with a personal essay is make sure you are ready to put it out in the public. Definitely. But when it comes to actually writing it, so I'd say that the problem with the personal essay is there's like no one structure, but the one I found the most interesting, even for like a fun one, and also for one that's about trauma, is I find circling around the point, because the personal essay is about an epiphany. It's about like a light bulb moment that then changes you. So actually, the person you're you writing in the present tense, or you're writing in the present, and the person you're writing about at the start of that essay isn't actually you anymore. It's a past version of you. And you and the reader are looking back on this past version and you're waiting for the conversion. How do they become someone new? When does it happen? When is that moment that they change? So what I'd say is you're kind of circling that moment in smaller and smaller circles. So you start at the big circle. You start with the 5 W's, the classic 5 W's of who, what, where, why, when. All of that stuff. I find usually a location is really helpful because for the art one, this artwork that changed my life, conjuring up Florence really helped me get back in that memory. And being inside, when you go inside a cathedral when you're on holiday and it can be boiling hot outside, you go in and it's cold because cathedrals they're built to be cold. And so it's that feeling of it was hot and sunny outside, but I'm chilly. And then I was like, oh, this really brings it back. So like sensual kind of, I hate the word sensual, but I do mean literally of the senses. That kind of tactile, tangible type stuff. It helps the reader go there as well and go meet your past version and actually be in that cathedral, be in the church with me. There were really high windows, very high ceilings, and the actual fresco I'm talking about is like up there, so you're gazing up at it. So you want to take the reader back there and have all of those details. And then you're doing a big circle of, generally in my life, I was going through a divorce, or my parents had died, or like very general. But then where are you in that journey? What point have you got to in that journey? And you narrow down, and then you get to that kind of light bulb moment. And then that's usually, I'd say, 2/3 of the way in. And then you have a little bit more of how that person who had the light bulb moment then becomes you. And then maybe 15 years, maybe 100 years, well, they'll be a long-lived writer. Let's say that. They could be a half a century. But just like how did that person who then changed then become you? So you're tracking changes in yourself, really. It's a very tiny memoir, essentially. And that makes more sense the more you practice, or you reading them. Reading them was what was most helpful to me. And yeah, it struck me that they almost were taking time to get to their point, which kind of mirrors journeys of healing or journeys of trying to put our lives back together. Yeah. They're different to everything else, different kind of writing.
Yeah, it really does seem like that. You've just mentioned so many things that I didn't even consider. So thank you. That was very insightful, I think. You've mentioned you do also pitch things that are not personal essays then.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been pitching less during the lockdown because as I said, I started comedy, and even though we've had a pandemic, I managed to get some like comedy writing and bits and bobs like that and do some online gigs. So I was doing a bit more of that. But yeah, like interviews are a big one that I really like, which probably also lead into personal essays because you're trying to build a picture of someone at a very specific moment in time, but also in the context of who they are generally in their public life. I had a really interesting interview once with Natalie Dormer, who's in Game of Thrones. And it was about, we got into a conversation about nudity. So she was well known early in her career, but apparently as the papers put it, being fine with or like really enjoying nudity, which just seemed like really odd to me because it's, you're on set, there's like lights everywhere, there's like film crew, that doesn't ring true to me. That doesn't sound like anything, particularly like she was in her 20s, So she's very similar age to me. So I just like in my 20s, that would have been my nightmare. I just don't see how anyone loves this. And so when I had this interview with her, it had been originally she wanted to talk about Me Too type stuff, not necessarily something that had happened to her, but she had lots of views on it, and she was obviously promoting the project as well. But when she talked about her Wikipedia page, and it was on her Wikipedia page in her personal life that like she loves getting nude on camera, and she's like, I would really like that to go away. I wish that wasn't there. That's so not who I was. I felt kind of I had to say yes to these kind of scenes, and I was like, I completely believe you. You don't. Yes, I believe you. I don't understand any other 25-year-old just being like, this is great. And so I just put that into the interview, and then like literally the next day, her Wikipedia changed. I mean, she has such a big fan base. She has such a big fan base. Probably men, I imagine, obsessed with her. And they saw that come out, and they were like, "Oh, what a surprise! This actress did not love her nude scenes." It's like, yeah, well done. So they actually did change it, and they cited my piece. And so that was really great, because I just thought, I think she has been misquoted. I think she has been sexed up for the papers. I don't think that's true of anyone. You can decide. I think you can decide, yeah, if she had autonomy, and if she could have decided, great, this is for the greater good, this is for the art of it, I will do this, fine. But from what she was talking about, like she was in a series called The Tudors, which was I think early noughties or like mid noughties, and yeah, like that was just known for like sex and nudity. And so I was like, I fully believe you, this completely rings true for me. So it was nice to see that have an actual effect, but also there is something in the personal essay there that it was tracking a change in someone. And in this case, yeah, she had always not been comfortable with this thing she was made to do in her career, but she was being public about it, and she felt empowered to be public about it. And so there's a change in her and a change in the industry, which meant that women's careers weren't just over if they were like, I don't like this thing we have to do. So I think those interviews and those profiles for me probably led into, well, what can I write something like this about myself? And also I think the question a lot of us ask with personal essays is, should I? Am I worth it? Like Natalie Dormer is a huge star and I'm not. And my answer is, do you know what, the more relatable, the more you think your subject might be very small, and it's quote unquote, I never tell anyone, you know, to name the size of what they think either their trauma or their fun essay is. I would say that actually relatability is a really valuable thing, and you find that in journalism. So someone in one of my personal essay classes said, you know, I really just want to talk about this horrible breakup I had, and I want to explore that. And I was like, breakups are one of the best, not they're awful, but they're really fertile ground, because aren't they just like, there are no rules? Just anything, any horrible secrets can come out, and you leave something and then you need to go and pick it up, but like you have to have this horrible conversation and you've just changed as two people and you don't treat each other the same anymore. Like, it just feels to me that even a very well-behaved breakup is like lawless. How could you be so different to who you used to be? How can you talk to each other in that way? And so actually it's absolutely fascinating, and you can track the changes of yourself through that relationship. Were you ever yourself in that relationship? And you know, classically, when we first start dating someone, we all put on an act. So they're actually really fascinating. So the things that we think, oh, they're really standard there every day, I would look at what's the relatability here. Like, how many people out there will be nodding and saying, oh yeah. And like the best novels have that feeling, like, oh, you've just named something I felt, but I didn't know there were words for it. So I would say less self-judgment. You don't need to judge like, oh, you've had this happen and mine's so. No, it's not about judgment. It's about what truth you can find in it. What's a universal truth that someone else can take away and go, oh, like that's helped me. Oh, that's made sense to me. That's it. And that can come from anything you've experienced. It's really, can you analyze it? Are you ready to analyze it? Do you feel like you want to analyze it? And then when you do analyze it, what do you find? That's it. You don't need to judge your material. Be compassionate towards it, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like as a woman, there's so many things that are not talked about things that we go through in our day to day, our bodies, all these things that sometimes we're afraid to even share with our friends, because we think, oh, we're so weird and that's so specific to me. But then you find out actually that happens to everyone, and those are little gaps in content at the moment that I feel like are missing. So I think your point is definitely very valid.
Yeah, women's health, mental health, there was huge areas there, and yeah, we have this veil of shame and secrecy, and then someone will write, endometriosis, I feel like has been quite a big topic, maybe last year coming into this year, and it's huge. Like, women live lives of pain, can face infertility, so many complications from it, and it's hard to get a diagnosis, but we really weren't seeing conversations about it. And until we do that, until we have words for it, and like pain is so how do you tell a doctor like what level your pain is? And a person, I say, will not give you that scale, but if you can read just more around other people having had a similar issue, you can get a sense of the scale of pain. Like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think all of these things, yeah,
Definitely.
You're helping people.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some time for questions. If anyone wants to ask any questions, you can pop them in the chat. You can raise your hand and ask them in person. It's up to you. If not, I also have got some questions. Anyone? No questions? Oh,
I have
Amy?
a question. Do you think there's a particular pressure on women, queer people, and people of colour to break into the industry using their trauma because their experiences are normally more specific?
Yeah, I think the problem can feel like there's one door over here for you, and you can only walk in through that door. And I think if an editor's making you feel like that, then get out. It's not worth doing it. I think writing essays about experiences related to your race or your gender or your sexuality or anything else that again might have made you feel marginalized, but is in fact a completely valid part of your character. I think only write those kinds of essays from a place of power. I know there are issues around, for instance, you'll have Black History Month, and there can be a feeling for Black journalists that only at that point do they get to write, and only then is it about certain experiences. I think there's a problem with the industry. I know that it's the industry trying to do something from a good place, but it can feel like, oh, this is the only time I get given an opportunity. And it is down to you on a personal level to see if it works with your values, if you do want to write that piece at that moment. It shouldn't be, and I hope increasingly it's not the only way to get into the industry. I know we want to make a name for ourselves, don't we? We want to stand out, because often a lot of early journalism work is shifting, and it's feeling like a cog in a wheel, like, oh, someone's taking over my shift, or I'm part of a team, and it feels very hard to stand out. I would hope that as the industry somewhat diversifies, and a lot of that is to do with the internet taking over in many ways, I would hope that people don't feel they have to unpack the things that make them quote unquote different and write about them. I would hope that there are ways for anyone to get into the industry without having to sort of go into their deepest and hardest experiences. It should be a choice. Always, it should be a choice. And that's why I mentioned kind of money and essays being a part of a career, but not the whole before. So I think unless you're kind of a really famous name, or someone who's kind of like, so for instance, Raven Leilani, who's written the novel Luster, which is like on a lot of kind of best of 2020 and 2021 novels at the moment. She wrote a beautiful essay for Sunday Times Style, I think the week just gone. And she's actually written it about her hair. And she's a Black woman, but she's not writing about hair in a political sense. It's really to do with mourning and people she's lost. And she's lost people during COVID. And it's absolutely stunning. But when, she's pretty much famous these days, they probably came to her and asked her to write something. And so she wrote something really deep and personal and touching on political issues, but from a place that she wanted to. I'd say that there are probably other ways to make money to carry on from month to month, and there are other ways to make your name. You shouldn't feel pushed into writing something when you don't want to and you're not ready, and you don't think it's for the right reasons on the editors or the publication's part. So the more people say no, hopefully editors will learn that it's not the right thing to ask as well. But it is tough when you're given an opportunity. It can be tough to turn it down. Yeah, things need to change in that respect, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got a question in the chat.
Oh.
How do you devise a strong pitch for a personal essay, especially when trauma is embedded into it, even though it isn't necessarily a traumatic tale, if that makes sense?
So that's why I try to pitch editors when they've asked for this, because then you almost have, like, you can use their language and write back to them and say, like, question, answer. So with, I'm trying to think of a good example, with the unconventional wisdom one, I just kind of went back with, we have this Elizabeth Kubler-Ross model of the 5 stages of grief. So they're parodied very well in The Simpsons, but actually those 5 stages of grief were invented by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the 70s for someone who's been told they've got a terminal illness, and so it's for them to understand their own death has a date and is coming, but it's not for people who've lost someone else and are trying to grieve a loved one. It's never been for them. It's been co-opted for that. So I used the language that Brandy had tweeted out around the conventional wisdom it's the 5 stages, but actually it isn't. And why do I know this? Why should I be the person to write it? Because my parents died before I turned 20. So I'd say with personal essays, when you're responding to someone, using their language, just trying to hit the marks that they've put. So what do they actually want? So with the apartment therapy one, writing to your area where you live like you've got a crush on it. So what are the areas I need to hit? So obviously I've got an advantage with the Beatles connection because it gives it a name and like a rock star thing, and you can see faces in your head already. So like the crush thing. But then what else is beautiful? What else is mesmerizing? So Primrose Hill for the sunset is great. But the best bit, the most secret bit is where there's the library at Swiss Cottage and the gym, or like the council library and gym. So they're not necessarily built to be beautiful, but someone landscaped the gardens outside, the council did, and they planted Japanese cherry trees. So why everyone goes to Japan in spring to see the cherry trees? They actually planted them here in London. And so for me, that's the best bit. So I kind of just like responded in the language that she had and tried to match the format she had. Also, because it was a series, I could go and read the other letters that had already been written. And the same with Unconventional Wisdom, there was a series. So I try to pitch when there's a series and when the editors put a call out. Otherwise, if you're trying to cold pitch, which is, you can do that, there's no problem with that. I'm trying to think of an example when I've done it. When I pitched, do you remember the Me at 20 challenge? It was like 10 lockdowns ago. I can't remember what it actually was, but people were posting pictures of themselves at 20 on social media. And I was saying that, I was grieving then. I basically lost my family at that point. So it was a time of grief and it was terrible. But also when I was looking at these in detail, particularly women's Me at 20s, people always apologising for their appearance, or they were saying how depressed they were then and how it didn't show. And there was a lot of very sad language around people posting these pictures, and often from people of all sorts of different ages. And I thought, I had this terrible time, but everyone else was having a great time when they're 20. It's like, no, actually they weren't. And so I developed this idea that we're told so much that our 20s are a perfect, amazing time in our lives. We put a lot of pressure on them, and they're actually a time of indecision, unpredictability, and not knowing if the decisions we make now are going to pan out for us. Plus, there's been a lot of financial unpredictability, I think, for people who went to university 2008 onwards. There's been like 2 financial crashes now. So actually it's been a really tough time, and we idealise it, but that's not a real thing. So I think, that just came from a realisation I had. So keep reading widely, looking at what's out there. And then there are the same rules as any pitch. I would look at the rules around pitching opinion pieces, which you'll often find on like the Guardian's opinion page and other places. And I think the main thing is why are you writing this piece? Why would we come to you of all people? And it's about crafting that in a way that you can accept, that doesn't like hurt you to write it, but at the same time gets across that you've had this experience and you've lived through this and you've come out the other side. And so it's, you know, it's important it's you because you've lived it, and also it's important it's you because you can do the writing. And those are two quite big things to offer as well. But yeah, I'd look around sort of the guidelines for opinion pieces. It's not the same kind of writing, but what you're offering instead of reporting or great, you know, sourcing or access is that you are the raw material. And so you've had that experience and you can do this. So I say generally that would be helpful for cold pitching personal essays. But if you can find a call out, that just gives you something to work off.
Yeah, thanks for answering that question. I don't think we have time for any more questions, but would it be possible for them to contact you in any way if they have any questions following up from this?
You can get me on Twitter, so this is me. And yeah, I've got this personal essays masterclass, or at the moment it's 3 hours and it is £65, which I do think can be quite expensive for students. I have in the past run a 1.5 hour version, which was cheaper. So I'll look into doing that again, like lockdown, depending on what's happening with our lives. But I have run shorter versions, and I think it's think of it more as like fiction writing or book writing, where there are drafts and you might write something and put it away and come back to it later, and it's something that kind of percolates in your mind, as opposed to journalism, which is on a tight kind of deadline and is written in a different way and is very factual. This is like a muscle to kind of exercise over time. But I hope you do give it a go, and some of my favourite pieces have been my personal essays, and yeah, they kind of brought me a lot of opportunities, and they've been quite cathartic to write as well. I felt good after writing them. That's partly because I gave myself a lot of time to be ready to write them as well. So I'd always recommend doing that. And one thing we didn't quite cover, but I mentioned boundaries. So just think about if your writing involves anyone else, are they going to be in your life still? And are they going to be affected by it? And that's really important, because people who have been written about can feel very helpless and very powerless in the face of your writing. They can be really hurt. Even things that just revealing something people did not previously know, how might they feel? And that's really important to start thinking about where your boundaries are. There are people I won't write about in my life because I know there's just no way in which it will work for them and make them happy. So I don't. So that's important too, boundaries.
Thank you, that's great advice. And this session definitely inspired me to look into writing some personal essays. And I hope everyone who's watching has felt that way as well. So thank you so much for everyone who came today. And thank you so much for speaking. It was very lovely to hear about everything that you mentioned today. I hope you also had a good time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great. I love to write personal essays. They're great. So good luck with them, guys. And yeah, good luck with everything. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. See you guys in the next session. Thank you all. Bye.